Hey guys, what is going on? It's Fen here again. So today I wanted to do something to help someone out, and it's basically showing them how to model a particular part of an object that they're working on. And I really wanted to put this off because I wanted to get a real tutorial out for you guys. But unfortunately, I just feel that my time is probably better more spent helping someone than doing a tutorial that maybe people aren't even interested in. So if I can help one person, then maybe help a dozen, then I'd rather just help that one person because I have no idea, especially with the amount of people that watch the content that I produce, whether they like it or not, because I don't really get much feedback. So that's something that you guys can work on as fans and supporters, that type of thing, is they're giving more feedback on the type of things that you want to see. So as you can see, this is the object that I've modelled. It's actually only part of it, but I thought I would just throw my thoughts out there and how I tackled this, because it can be somewhat misleading when you're actually modelling, and I'll probably go into that as well. But let's just have a look at this object. So let me just delete the actual material tag so we can have a look at this and kind of see. This is how it's made up. It's nothing fantastic. It's very a simplistic object, which is really what you want to be working with when dealing with these type of objects. You want to keep it simple, but sometimes you do need a lot of geometry in order to keep the curvature and not have really distinctive bumps in your mesh. So what he's trying to model, I probably should start off by saying that, is he's working on a project that is this Skogworks. I have no idea. I don't even know what kind of language that is. If I had to guess, Swedish or something? I don't know. But basically, he's trying to model this object here, and he got pretty far. The only thing he had difficulties with was this kind of gash in the actual object, which is lasered into this. So when it's actually being moulded, you've got different things such as this can be lasered in and these, but generally this is, because it's plastic, it will be from a moulding. So you've got to really figure out how this was constructed in the first place, and kind of go from there. And one of the most difficult things about this entire endeavour is that we only have really one reference to work with. I mean, I scoured Google for quite a long time and only found one usable, decent reference, which was this one, which is like 10 times bigger than the reference the person who I'm helping gave me. So this one is really, really high quality. But it's the only one I could find. I can't find a top one. I can't find a side view. He did give me a side view, but it wasn't such an angle that it wasn't really usable. So I've kind of having to eyeball it and guess. And that's the only thing you can really do. But yeah, let's get on with this. So this is the one that I have, and it's fairly accurate. So the other thing I could really say to you is when modelling something like this is just break it down, really break it down. So at the minute we have a cap and we have a body. Let's work on the body, and then you can obviously take the same techniques and do the cap. So what we're going to do is we're going to make something that is very similar to this, which in our case is a cylinder. So I'm going to bring this cylinder up, and you can see this cylinder radius is 50 centimeters. So you can see how big this actual object, or should I say this reference is. So we're going to up this. I'm going to move it down a bit because we're kind of coming to this cut-off line, because we're just going to model this portion first. So 275 looks decent. The height of 200 looks fine, and the radius, or should I say rotation, segments is the core here. This is the one thing that you have to get right. I believe I used 18, and I can just double check that by bringing these back, and you can kind of see these line up, and yeah, so it's 18 that I used. If you go too low, you won't have enough geometry, and it'd be very bulky and very difficult to get this shape. So to save you the work, if you are copying this, 18 is kind of the golden number here that I've found. I'm going to go to caps. I'm going to turn off caps because we don't need caps. And then I'm going to press C to make this editable. Go into point mode, Control A to select all, right click and go to optimize, because these will actually be connected, because when you disable caps, things tend to get a little bit hectic, so you need to optimize it in order to reconnect everything. Weird, I know, but that's the way Cinema 4D rolls. So what I want to do is, one important thing is to be in all 4 views. If you hover over each view and press H, it will kind of encompass whatever object you have in the entire window. Now the reason I say this is important, because I'll show you. I'm going to go to rectangle selection, make sure only visible elements is unchecked, grab the bottom, grab the scale tool and scale this out to the side to match up this contour. Now as you can see from the top, something is a little weird. Something isn't really acting as if it should, and the reason this is happening is because we've only scaled in one axis, which is left and right, which is the x-axis, and we need to scale it also in the z-axis. So how do we actually do that? Well, the easiest way really is just to eyeball it. So I'm going to move it out, and what I'm doing is I'm kind of looking at this distance and trying to mimic it here, and that way we're going to get a somewhat very accurate representation. Sometimes you can use this one, but as you can see, it doesn't actually scale the one that you want, so you could maybe go to, I think the top view probably would be the easiest. So just to elaborate on that, you could go to the top view and scale it out like so, and that would give you a more accurate representation. Again, if you did have a top reference, this would be super important, because you could actually get it to where you want it. Now of course this looks a little strange because it is a cylinder. We actually want to grab this entire object and we want to scale it down, because this object is kind of oblong, it's like an egg shape more than anything. So we want to kind of guesstimate here, because we don't have a top reference. That's all we're going to be able to do is guesstimate. So this is where the difficulties come in, because things, you just basically need to play around with it and tweak and tweak. Not twerk, tweak. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the line selection tool, and what we want to do here is we want to basically give this the right contour. So we're going to be using this line here, and this line needs to follow this this illustration at the back that we're following, so it's the reference. Now the only way to really do that is to move these. So I'm going to select this one and I'm going to move it over to the right. So I'm going to grab this. Now look in the viewport and see what's happening. So we've basically grabbed both of these and we've moved them to where we think it looks accurate. However, in the actual viewport, you can see things aren't particularly lining up, and that's where the multi-views come in. So realistically, what you have to do is go into the top view and move these across, but keeping your spherical type of, you know, your base mesh, because that is quite important. So what I like to do before I do anything, if I just group these, is make a duplicate of this shape, because this is the accurate shape that I want. It's going to give me the most accurate results when I add a hyperNURBS. So I like to keep that and hide it, because that's going to be my go-to reference for this shape. Because when we are going in here and moving these points, I'm looking at this this viewport to get this in line, but I'm also looking at the top to keep this as circular, or at least close to this shape as possible. I don't want to be out here, I don't want to be over here, I want to keep it as accurately as possible, so something like this. And it's the same with the bottom one. We're going to be moving it over like this and trying to keep the contours of this shape, but also keeping the contours of this reference as well. So we've got two references we're trying to work to, and this would be the exact same if you were working with a top reference. You want to keep it flowing, and this is the only way you can really do it. So now that we've got this, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to knife, and I'm going to put in another edge because we need a little bit more geometry. I'm going to make it 50%, and then not click there. I'm going to shift click there, 50%, enter, and then click, and that should give us our 50% in between these. So now that we've got this, we can see this one is actually quite perfect. We don't really need to move it. However, the top one still needs to be moved over a little. So I'm going to grab that, and again, I'm going to move it across, and that looks a little bit more accurate. And I'm going to bring it a little bit in, something like that looks good. And if we look in a viewport now, we've got this shape. So basically all we've done is we've moved a line diagonally and tried to keep the shape of this as much as possible. So what we need to do now is we're going to grab the UL, which is loop tool, and stop at edge boundaries so we can actually select this edge. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the front view, right click, and use a bevel, and I'm going to bevel this out, and I'm going to put it to about there. And I'm using one subdivision. The reason I'm using one subdivision is because we want to keep this line in the middle. It's very important. But also we need to keep the line on this edge and the back edge to basically give us that edge that we're looking for. So that being said, if we go into a viewport now, we now have 3 diagonal lines, and that is quite important. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab the UL tool again, grab the middle one, and then I'm going to go to the top viewport. And this again is very subjective because depending on how you want this to look, whether you want kind of a hard edge, you want to be moving it like this. So then we get this very hard edge, and if we put it into a hypernode, you can kind of see what you're going to be getting, which looks a little bit more accurate to have this hard edge, and then it actually blends off into a soft edge. So I think we're going to go for something like this time. Again, this is really subjective, depends what you're working on, and depends how you go about modeling it, because everything will be different, and you will probably do this differently. Even by following this, you will end up doing it differently. So we can keep that looks okay, it looks pretty decent. Now one of the most important things about this is to cut off the edges, keeping it quartz, keeping it clean. That is where the big issue comes in, because people will just leave n-gons, which is more than 4 sides, in here, and then when they add a hypernerves, it's going to look ugly as hell. So one of the important things that you need to do is to chop off the edges, to cut them off, to terminate them. And the easiest way to do it in our situation here is I'm going to use UL, I'm going to select the bottom edge here, so I'm going to uncheck the stop boundary edges, click this, go to move, hold control and drag down. That's going to give us a new edge from here. I'm then going to go to the scale tool, and then I'm going to go to the top view, and then I'm going to scale this out, just so we're keeping this contour, because we really need this edge to be as accurate as possible. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the rest of it from the viewport because it's the easiest. So the way to terminate edges that you need a hard crease, but they have to end in between more polygons. The way to do it is to add 3 edges in total, and you take 3 edges and you merge the ends of them into one. So I'll show you here because it's a little bit hard to understand. So I'm going to right click, go to knife, and this edge here has to be the hard edge. So in fact what I'm going to do is I'm going to use UL, select this edge, I'm going to turn on stop at edge boundaries, select this one, and I'm going to right click and go to bevel. I'm going to bevel this edge, something like that. Turn on the hypernerves to make sure this looks good, and it looks pretty good. I'm going to undo that though, and I'm just going to bevel it a tiny bit. So maybe something like 1.5. Again, this is subjective. It depends how hard you want the edge, etc. So that's one edge that we can terminate quite easily. We also need to terminate the middle edge here. So again, UL, click on that, and I'm going to go to bevel, and I'm going to bevel this one, maybe 2 this time. If you don't want the edges to move, because maybe sometimes you don't, like this one is a little bit too hard, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bevel this, and I'm going to bevel it, let's see, by quite a distance, but as you can see this edge starts to come back in, which is not what we want. So instead of using bevel, I'm just going to right click and go to the knife tool, and I'm going to use the knife tool like so, and maybe bring this one out a little bit, because we don't want such a hard edge. In fact, this one here looks a little too hard, so what we can do is go into the point mode, go into the slide tool, and we can slide these over slightly, which is going to give us a bit more of a softness. That one looks fine. So what we've got here is our termination edges. So what I want to do is go in here, and I want to add in another edge somewhere around here. Now you can do it with this edge that we created, however it's just going to be easier to terminate it at this edge. So what we want to do is we want to find the edges that we want to terminate, which are these ones in here. So I'm going to go into point mode because it's a lot easier to select. Right click, I'm going to go to stitch and sew, and I'm going to take the two outer edges and stitch them to the middle edge like this on all of the corners that we added edges. I'm then going to grab the slide tool. I'm going to slide this one in because we're gradually getting rid of this hard edge. And then what I want to do is I want to grab these edges in the middle of the ones that we just merged, right click and hit dissolve. You're going to see things start to get a little bit weird. That's just the thong tag. So what I like to do is put this down to 0. That way we can see what is going on. So let's clean up this straight away. I'm going to right click, going to go to stitch and sew, and go into point mode, and we're going to stitch these edges together just because we don't need them edges anymore. So we've now terminated them. The only problem we have now is we do have a quad in each of these. However, we need to use the slide tool and move this up in order to tell Cinema 4D that this section actually is a quad, because sometimes it can get confused and give you some really bad shading errors. So what we can do now is we can go to object mode, and we can turn this on, and then let's put the thong back up to 80 or 90, doesn't really matter. And then we can go to display and put ground shading, and as you can see here we have a pretty damn tidy edge. We've got a little bit of shading error down here. You can clean this up. It really depends how you want to go about cleaning this up. For example, we don't really have enough geometry in here, so instead of using 18 you could maybe put it up to 28, and then you would have a lot more geometry. I'm not sure if this would work, but I guess I could try. I want to select all of these edges here, and I wonder if we use the subdivide tool that it would just subdivide these areas. So if I just go to mesh, commands and subdivide, and it does work, which is kind of cool. However, we are going to get a problem here if we subdivide, go forward. And yeah, the only reason this has happened is simply because we have introduced more edges. So we could clean this up quite easily, in fact. But let me just undo that for a second. And as you can see, we do have a very good result here. And it is very accurate to what we were going for. And again, you would just do the same on this one, and you would terminate it the exact same way, 3 edges, and then you would just terminate it. Very, very simple. And this is pretty much how you would kind of tackle these. But just before we go, let's do that and go to mesh, commands, subdivide. And then what I want to do is I want to grab the point mode, grab the knife tool, go to line, and maybe just connect these up like so, and do the same here, kind of like that. Go into edge mode and get rid of these edges that are making our life a misery. right click and hit dissolve. And then what you need to do is just make sure that the edges in here are okay, because as you can see, I don't know if you can see, but we do have a few extra edges in here that are making things a little bit weird. Like there's one. So if we right click and hit dissolve and then go in here and right click and hit dissolve again, so let's clean that up a little bit, and we've still got another one in here and hit dissolve. There we go. And we've got one more in here, so right click dissolve. Now looking at these, it's actually implemented them edges in for us, so we want to kind of delete them. But before we delete them, I'm going to go to knife, and we're kind of just going to bring this round to connect here, and then we're going to go into the dissolve once we select these edges and just hit dissolve. And then we can hit this edge as well and this edge and hit dissolve. And this is where it kind of becomes a little bit complicated, because we have certain objects that do need to be adjusted. And the easiest way to fix this actually is to go into the knife tool, bring this edge down like so, and that's going to fix that object for us. And then what we can do is go into the edge mode, stitch and sew, and just kind of stitch these back. And then what we can do is go into the slide tool, slide this down so it's actually a lot more vertical, like so, and then bring this one up, because this is the edge now that we have to kind of play with. And let's actually undo that. Bring that one up though, because that is quite important. And then just kind of have a look at what we have. So if we have a look now, we've got a much more crisper edge actually, which isn't something that we maybe want. So what you would have to do then is to go in and kind of select these areas and just move them back in, something like so, and then you would get a lot more smoother transition. I don't know if that really turned out better, because as you can see, this is one of the things that you will have a problem with, is getting this kind of banding. If you can see it, you get these little bands, and that's because each section is a little bit out of symmetry, I suppose. As you can see, some of them are flat. It's all the new edges that we added in, they're all flat, so we get this kind of banding. So that's why it's really important to start off with the correct amount of geometry rather than trying to add it in later, because you will inevitably come into this. You can fix it, which comes into play with the reference that we had. Drop this into a HyperNerbs. It can be a little bit difficult to see, so maybe we can go into basics, turn on the color and change this to red, and then put on the HyperNerbs here. So basically what you're trying to do now is you're trying to grab sections of this and you're trying to move it so it actually follows the contour of that original shape. Again, very time consuming, and of course it's going to take a lot of effort to do that, and a lot of tweaking. So that's something you don't really want to do, because it will take you forever. So like I said before, pretty much just start off with the correct amount. In this case, 18 really worked quite well. There is better ways of doing this, however I haven't really found any. I haven't done pure modeling for quite a long time, so I'm a little bit rusty, but as you can see on my one here, we had a better transition than what I had with the one I've just done, and that's probably due to how long these are. It's kind of getting rid of them, and it's gradually making them a little bit better. In fact, if we could perhaps, if it will let me, take this one, this edge, and bring it down like so, then use UL select this edge and just delete that, and then we can grab that edge, which is the one we want, and we can move this down a little bit like so, and then just scale it out. Again, we just need to be a little bit careful that we're getting the right shape, and that looks okay. So then we can just put on this and turn on that, and yeah, you can see here we get a bit of a different result. It's a lot more smoother, it's less abrasive, I suppose, and of course I did up the subdivisions as well. So this looks pretty good. Again, this actually looks different from the one I did, and the reason it looks different is because it is different. I modelled it slightly different. When I pulled the middle edge back, I changed it slightly, and as you can see, just the general shape and size are both different. So that's one thing that you need to keep in mind, that it will be different, but it is all about your artisticness and the way you approach it. But generally that is how you would go about creating these objects. So yeah, so hopefully you guys found this helpful. Sorry if I was rambling a bit, it is quite late here, but yeah. So guys, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode, which hopefully will be a proper tutorial. So see you guys then. Peace.